Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Debra Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light. We want to show you some pictures. A friend of ours, Ann Smith, stopped by the Lighthouse Studios last night.
Best friend of our show.
Yes.
Ann Smith,
isn't that a great picture?
And Merry Christmas to you, and thanks for all the advice you give us every day. Keep watching the show and letting us know what we get wrong. She told us to wear red today. Well, she didn't, but we would do it for you, Ann.
Yes. Thank you for stopping by.
In just a minute, our Morning Light panel will go behind the headlines.
But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. People all over the world struggle with hunger, and each day, truckloads of food gets thrown away. Blessings of Hope is the vital link in the food chain, enabling volunteers to serve as the hands and feet of Christ in their local communities. Plus, we will meet Joe Watkins, the host of State of Independence. Learn from his journey, how it took him from the projects to the White House.
It's a story only God could write.
That is certainly true.
Well, Pennsylvanians are having fewer babies, and that has huge implications for high school graduation numbers and, of course, college enrollment. According to the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, we'll see a massive, get this, 17% decline in high school graduations just 17 years into our future, the year 2041. Experts call it an enrollment cliff. But the big question is why? Why the shift in attitudes towards families, big families, and children? And other than government incentives, what can be done to reverse the trend?
I think it really does come down to cost.
It's cost, yeah. It's cost, but I also think there is something that is happening that says our personal priorities can't give way to little creatures who might interrupt our life plan.
Our own priorities,
yeah,
that's
sure.
right. Well, Christian author Amy Julia Becker says there's something we can learn from friends and family living with disabilities this Christmas. Stop rushing. Amy's daughter Penny has Down syndrome. Included on a list of her life goals, Amy wants to go to college, work as an events planner, and for life not to be rushed. And that's something I think we all can learn from. So with the hustle and bustle of the Christmas season, what are some practical ways to simplify, slow down, and aim for significance?
I hope our Morning Light panel has some answers on that, because I think everyone wants to.
I want to know them.
Yeah, for sure. And 102 years ago this week, a revolutionary in American retail, Pennsylvania's John Wanamaker. Remember that name? Well, he died this last week 102 years ago. By nearly every measurement, he was one of the most successful businessmen and one of the world's richest. He was also lavishly generous with his workers and invented standards that are still guiding stores today, like the price tag, the money-back guarantee, and truth in advertising. But it was his support for Christian evangelism through the YMCA, Sunday schools, and Sunday breakfast mission, now Philly House, earning him an honored, although largely forgotten place in American history. So, in 2024, is it time for a revival and a review of the Wanamaker-style business principles? We'll take these questions to the Morning Light panel this morning. Good morning, gentlemen. Good to have you. Jamar Thrasher, a new face for our Friday. It was a gift to our viewers to have you back. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
And two Joes.
Yes.
Pastor Joe Green, glad to have you back. Joe Slack.
Good to be back.
Good to have you.
Good to be here.
What's happening? I think there's something we know anecdotally about what's happening, that you look at pictures from 100 years ago and you see 11 children, 10 children, 8 children. We talk to our grandmothers and they say, well, my mother came from a family of 11. Today, 1.2 children. What is happening? Joe, you work with families all the time. Thoughts?
Yeah. I wish I had a good answer for you.
Yeah.
It definitely is a cultural shift. It definitely is something that has changed around who we are and how we view things. And we were talking earlier about some of this, and Joe had some really good points to understand it a little bit better. I want to kick it over to him because he really had some good perspective.
You tell us why. Why is the American family shrinking?
Well, I think the culture has shifted and has become more and more in contrary to what the biblical standard was, because God told us to be fruitful and multiply. And I know people that have large families. My grandparents and great-grandparents have had very large families, and it was such a blessing to see how their families interact. But now in this culture, we have gotten to a place where not only do we think that children are secondary or something that is not a priority to us, and so many of us either only have a small family or we wait to have children. And to me, that goes against what the overall tone and desire of God, which is to be fruitful, multiply, what we're told to do. And you think about, at the end of the day, when you go against that particular viewpoint, not only do you look at children as something not to be desired right away, but we have to ultimately think about the fact that one of the titles that God gives us is Father. So the implication is that God's desire is to have family and have many children, and that is the heart of God. And as we pursue that, we look at children as the same way. They're a blessing, their inheritance, and their quiver in our,
So I could hear that, Jamar. Can hear people who are watching this saying, "Okay, you Christians like to have lots of families and babies, but I want to control my destiny. I want to plan this out so that I'm in the right spot in my life to be ready for children." And I hear people all the time, "We're getting married. We're probably going to wait 5 years or so to have children, to travel. We want to do some things before these children get in the way." And I don't think they're meaning that negatively. They just think of this as a reality, that this is the way life should work. What do you think?
I mean, I think very honestly, people aren't reading the scriptures and people are not living the scriptures. Unfortunately, people filter God's word through the culture of the times. And so the culture of the time says self-love. It's all about me, me, me. It's not about God. And we see this even in the church. And so even with married couples, people are prolonging starting families, which, it's never by the works that we do. We're saved by grace. However, as you had said, the point of it is, and scripture says this, children are like arrows in a warrior's quiver. And so the more children you have, the greater your families are. And, now I have a daughter, I was not married, but having a child is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. But there's a responsibility that comes with it. And people need to make that responsibility.
You, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's why I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. And you weren't a believer at the beginning of the process, right? I mean, part of you coming to Christ was saying, how do you want my life arranged?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, to be totally honest, one of the first times I've ever heard God, and I believe he's watching right now, my friend Jonathan in Pittsburgh, I was at his house and I felt God telling me, like, what are you doing? You're in Pittsburgh, your daughter's in the Harrisburg area. And so there's a pull and a spiritual connection. People talk about soul ties. There's no greater soul tie than your spouse and also with your children. It's a spiritual connection.
Joe, I see you nodding.
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with what these guys are saying. I think there's another important point to make too, right? Children are a gift from the Lord, and sometimes God doesn't give that gift. So we have to be careful when we're talking about it to not negate that path that God has for many people, right? So if we're talking, this was put in the context originally of like what's happening with high school graduation and the implications are what's that going to do for colleges and the workforce and things like that. We got to remember that God's in control of all of it, right?
Absolutely.
And so he has a plan and a purpose and he knows what he's doing. So we have to be careful not to forget that for some people, that's not God's path.
Right.
And that's okay. But what we do want to push back against is that cultural idea that I don't want it because I want to do me instead of I want to do God.
I'm glad you say it because I know we have viewers out there who are saying, look, I've wanted to have children and we can't have children. And maybe adoption isn't yet an option.
Amber was here most of the week with us and her story is a story of adoption. And I had a wonderful conversation with her talking about that and the way God has blessed her through adoption. It's a whole different thing.
Sorry for...
no, you're good.
Let's not forget, Jesus was adopted. Moses, I mean, the Bible has stories of adoption, of stories of families that aren't traditional. I mean, Joseph had to raise a son that biologically was not his, and he had strength from the Holy Spirit to do so.
So I love this topic. We're going to come back to it. I want to talk, just to give some practical advice to families who are watching about this season and take a minute or so. Your idea for how to slow this season down. I mean, this wonderful mom who has a Down syndrome child who's got goals and ambitions in life, but all she really wants is life and everyone else to kind of sync up with the rhythm of life that is not hurried and rushed. Give a word or two on what we can do.
I just think when we look at life itself, life is a gift from God. Every life is vitally important to God. And so even if children have challenges, they are still loved. They're just as important as anybody else. And I had a friend who had a child that was autistic. And when we were talking about it, and she says, you know, if they came up with a cure for autism tomorrow, I wouldn't give it to my child because I love him exactly as he is. And when we start to look at people like that, like God loves us exactly as we are. And when we look at that from that perspective, it means even if some people have challenges or don't have challenges, that they're all equal in God's eyes and we love them unconditionally.
And we can learn something from them as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Jeff?
Two practical things. One, I think of Mary and Martha when we talk about busyness with stuff. And Jesus says, Martha's busy running around doing all the things and taking care and doing good things. And Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet. And Jesus says, Martha, Mary has chosen the better portion. She's chosen the better thing. I think number one, we have to choose to slow down.
Yeah.
It's a choice. And we have to learn to say no to good things so that we can get to the better things.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, we need to think through how we're approaching the whole world and just remember that, again, God is in control and has a beautiful plan and a beautiful purpose, and not get so worried about trying to create our own Hallmark moment. We're so busy trying to create that unobtainable thing that we're missing the blessings right in front of us.
Always think Christmas morning is just going to be that Hallmark movie. Yeah.
The best present that you can give somebody is your presence.
Love that. Speaking of presents, with a T, the present, John Wanamaker, I thought it was very important this Christmas season because many people in the Southeast think of Christmas and they think of Wanamakers and going to Wanamakers, and that for years, an incredible display of the crucifixion that he had at the Wanamaker store underneath the big organ. Wanamaker revolutionized retail. Retail seems to be moving away from those principles of John Wanamaker, of the money-back guarantee, the truth in advertising, the fixed price. Your thoughts about what we can learn, 30 seconds from Wanamaker's legacy.
I tell you what, Wanamaker's, when I was growing up, was one of my favorite stores. My grandmother used to take me there, and I know this season they would have all the accoutrements of the season of Christmas and different things like that. But when you think about most successful businesses, they started out with the good principles. The person who founded the business had the right principles, that they valued their employees, they valued their customers, truth in advertising, and all the other stuff. And what happens, unfortunately, is many of these large corporations, over time, they stray away from those principles and it becomes all about money. And when that happens, then you lose all the foundational principles that founder had. And when you go away from the principles and you focus on money, eventually all those businesses will fail.
Feels like you have to dust off the playbooks. I'm going to let that be the final word today. John Wanamaker, if our audience is not familiar with his legacy, it's worth a Google, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks to our Morning Light panel for joining us today. Coming up on Morning Light, empowering ministries to bring hope to their communities by bridging the gap between food surplus and people in need. Debra will sit down with the CEO of Blessings of Hope. Up next, going to be a great conversation.
More than 47 million people across the U.S. live in food insecure households. That's according to the 2024 USDA Food Security Report. Inflation and the end of the pandemic era benefits leave many families struggling to afford basic necessities. Blessings of Hope is working to change those statistics. Their mission: feed the hungry, deliver hope, and empower others to be the hands and feet of Christ. Here to explain how they are combating food insecurity is the CEO, David Lapp. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Tell us, what is Blessings of Hope?
So Blessings of Hope is a food distribution, almost like a logistics network for nonprofits. So we receive food from over 200 donors that have large volumes of food they need to donate or get rid of. And then we make that available to over 1,600 nonprofits, mostly in the Mid-Atlantic region, that then use that food to replenish their food pantries.
So what types of organizations are we talking about?
So we're talking anything from halfway houses serving a few men coming out of prison up to a church in Baltimore that's serving 500 meals a day out of their basement, anything in between.
So we were talking earlier about your journey. How did you get started?
So in 2005, we were excommunicated from the Amish church, and we started as a community of families. There was 5 couples of us that started the Light of Hope Ministries actually more as a counseling ministry and as a church. And then we had a need amongst our own families for food, and Aaron Fisher would start started going to an outreach here in Harrisburg to give out food, and he started hearing about the volumes of food that get wasted, and the issue being the large corporations have all this food available to donate, but they don't want to deal with 50 organizations every day. So it's cheaper for them to just send it to the landfill and get rid of it. So what we've developed at Blessings of Hope is a warehouse model where we can take the large volumes, store it, so that the key of this whole thing is to take the volume when the donor wants to get rid of it, at the volume the donor wants to get rid of it, and then make that available to the nonprofits when they want it, at the volume that they want to use it.
And you were saying
that
there's,
bridge.
Yeah, there's a lot of food that is wasted.
Yeah, we live in a nation that wastes a semi-truckload of food every 13 seconds. There is no food shortage. According to the USDA website, 30 to 40% of all food produced in America is wasted. I mean,
That's amazing.
The more research I do on this, the more shocked I am at what I'm finding, and the more I am convinced that world hunger is not a production issue, it's a management issue.
Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. So how did you told us how you got started, but what was God calling you to do? I mean, how did you feel his presence saying, yeah, this is what we really need to be doing?
So when we started out, we started in a 3-car garage, and in 2010 we committed to packing 7 boxes a week for a local pastor. So, what you see today is not where we started, of course, but you're just taking that next step in faith and trusting that God would show you, the next steps to take. And over the years, we've heard so many people talk about they knew God called them to something, and they would fight it because they didn't want to take that step of faith. And I think it was 2018 or 2019, we had a conversation as founders of the organization, what would happen if we never said no to God? Instead of wasting all this time trying to educate God of what's possible, we would say, yes, Lord, show us what the next step is, and then we'd take that next step. And it's been absolutely incredible to see what God has done the last number of years.
And what are you seeing as far as making a difference?
So there's quite a few organizations that are able to get their food from us that used to get it from other organizations that had restrictions around sharing the gospel. We are privately funded, which allows us to empower the church to be the hands and feet of Jesus and to reach out to the needs of the people rather than just serve a humanitarian need. We can serve food, but if we can empower the church to be the church and also share the gospel, also share other critical life skill trainings, when they're giving out food, we can change society rather than just put another Band-Aid on the issue.
I'm sure you still have needs. How can our viewers help you?
Volunteers, we see about 1,300 volunteer positions a week filled right now.
A week?
A week. And
That's
like last year, we had
people.
170,000 volunteer hours. So if you're watching today and you're one of those volunteers, thank you for being a part of what God is doing at Blessings of Hope. Also donations, or if there's a food donor that has product they want to donate, reach out to our team. As we keep growing, we're always looking for more food donors. Always, if you're a nonprofit that's looking for food to restock your pantry, reach out to our team. BlessingsofHope.com. There's a lot of information on our website of how to get involved, or donations. Here at the year end, we're doing a major fund drive. So yeah, whatever God lays on your heart, there's a lot of ways to get involved.
Oh, great. David, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing this and what you are doing.
Thank you.
And Merry Christmas to you, too.
Merry Christmas to you.
And David said, if you would like to volunteer or donate to Blessings of Hope, check out blessingsofhope.com. And coming up next on Morning Light, conversation that's conservative, Christian, and driven by kindness. The host of Lighthouse TV's State of Independence, Joe Watkins, shares his journey from the projects in Queens to the White House. Lighthouse TV offers faith-based programs that really make a difference. State of Independence is one of them. I sat down with the host, Joe Watkins, to share his journey from growing up in the projects to becoming a presidential aide. Talk to us about growing up in the projects in Queens, New York.
Yeah. So my mother always tells me, she says, where we lived wasn't so bad. When we were growing up in the Woodside projects, it was a place for veterans from World War II and their families to live, and people who were, my father was a veteran who went to college after the war, as many men did back then. So they finished college in their mid-20s, a lot of them, some of them in their late 20s. My father was in his mid-20s by the time he finished college. But we lived in Woodside Projects, and it was a great place to live back then. I know maybe in more recent decades it's been a more challenged place, but at the end of the day, what mattered for me was having the love and nurture and support of my parents, of both my father and my mother, who had such great hopes for us and who were such a wonderful example to us of what a married couple should be and what a mom and dad should be.
Well, you mentioned they gave you hope, and hope that took you all the way to the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I wish I could say I got there by myself, but God is amazing and good and kind. And I had an opportunity to go to boarding school first. I won a scholarship to boarding school, so I went away to boarding school for 5 years in Massachusetts, and then came to the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to go to college. And I had a wonderful experience at Penn. So I played sports, I played basketball. I got cut too after I had a wonderful start, but I ended up getting cut my sophomore and my junior year. But I ran on the varsity track team as well, and I was in a number of the plays, and I was an artist for the school newspaper. I just had a wonderful, and I met the love of my life in college, my sophomore year, her freshman year, and we got married after Penn. So it was just a great opportunity to go to a place like Penn. Penn State's a great place. People always, outside of the Commonwealth, people confuse the two, and they say, "Oh, Penn State." And I'd love to be able to claim, that I was a Nittany Lion, but I went to the other Penn, the University of Pennsylvania, and it was just a great opportunity for me.
Well, talk to us about the White House.
So I had no designs on ever being in politics, on being anything other than a minister. So after college, I went to seminary, and after seminary, I was a college chaplain and campus minister at a couple of different places. And in my second ministry position in the state of Indiana, I met Dan Coates, who was running for Congress, and his former boss, Congressman Dan Quayle, who was running for the U.S. Senate. And I met them early in the campaign, and I ended up volunteering for their campaigns. And when they won, Congressman Coates invited me to D.C., and then he sent me over to Senator Quayle's office and said, "Senator Quayle wants to hire you." And so I ended up working in the U.S. Senate for Dan Quayle, a newly elected United States Senator, one of the youngest at the time. And then while I was working on Dan Quayle's Senate staff, because I was a minister, I was asked to do an invocation and benediction at a big state dinner, Republican dinner in Indiana. And the guest speaker was Vice President George Bush. So George and Barbara Bush were there, and I was in the green room with them. So I met them when I worked for Dan Quayle on his Senate staff. And then a few years after that, I was asked to run for Congress. I was the Republican nominee for Congress in a district in Indiana. I won the primary, but I lost the general election. But I was endorsed by then Vice President George Bush. He came into the state and endorsed me and two other candidates for Congress. And I stayed in touch after I lost. And so when he was running for the presidency in 1988, and chose Dan Quayle, my former boss, as his running mate, I took a leave from my job. I was back working at the University of Pennsylvania as an assistant to the president of the university. I took a leave from my job and worked in the campaign. And then when they won, I was asked by President Bush's staff to join his White House staff.
Oh, that is really amazing. And I'm sure your faith and belief in God really has carried you through all of these different decisions you have made.
Yeah, God just opens doors where he will, and I'm grateful for it.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us, Joe.
Thanks, Deborah.
And you can watch State of Independence on Lighthouse TV on Friday at 8 in the evening, Saturday at 5:30, and Mondays at 8 in the evening. Stay with us. We are back right after the break.
Well, welcome back to Morning Light. In front of Philadelphia City Hall is an 8-foot high, 6-inch high statue on top of a granite pedestal with the name John Wanamaker emblazoned on the bottom. And one word, citizen, underneath. It was installed in 1923, a year after his death, and it was a gift from school children who raised, get this, $50,000 in pennies, about $887,000 in today's money, to honor a man who spent his life and fortune loving and serving children, his employees, customers, neighbors, like few men before or since. But if you want to find John Wanamaker's real legacy, take a 10-minute walk from City Hall to 302 North 13th Street, Philly House, or what used to be called Sunday Rescue Breakfast Mission, to see his living legacy at work. It's a work he started that's still going strong today. Since 1878, tens of thousands of the homeless, the hungry, the hurting have found help and hope beyond their circumstances. You see, for Mr. Wanamaker, it was never really about making money, but using that money to introduce others to the hope he found in Christ. His store, gone. His life still speaks. For Debra and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for spending the week with us. Go check on your neighbors this weekend, and we'll see you back here again on Monday.